more transit should also be taken into consideration. Anyway, just to let everybody know, and how welcome to Talking Niagara this morning. We're live. We're live courtesy of StreamYard, and just wanted to let you know that this is a StreamYard live show, and that's the technology that we use to actually get Talking Niagara on the air. And just wanted to let everybody know that. So, welcome to Talking Niagara. And this morning, Angela Browne and I are talking about municipal planning. How do the cities plan their futures? Right? Are they planned or simply fall into place because developers are driving the bus? Right. So, welcome to Talking Niagara this morning, as we discuss this topic and many others. All right, well, this topic primarily. Okay. All right. So, good morning, Angela. How are you?
Oh, pretty good.
And just to say, everybody, if you didn't have the opportunity to see Laurie Lococo's show last night, she actually put it out on her own page. But you can also just go watch it on yesterday's Talking Niagara, or even go watch it on my page on YouTube. There we go.
Yeah, I saw Laura yesterday. It was terrific. She was terrific.
Yeah, she is. I think I'd have to say, and this is, I'm not saying this in a derogatory way or anything like that. I think she's becoming quite a rounded politician. She does her research. I'm not saying I agree with Laurie on everything. I don't. There's a few things she stuck her hand up and voted on that I would not stick my hand up and vote on. But that's fine. She does her research. She represents, I think, constituents in the city well. And that is, and that's what we need.
Yeah, they have the town hall. She brings in a town hall so that people could come in and talk about issues.
Yeah, and actually that's entirely true. She's got a town hall on May 30th at 6 p.m. at Drummond, at the Drummond Lions Club, which is basically between Morrison and Morrison and the QEW, 420 in Niagara Falls, and so that's going to be 6 p.m. on May 30th. May 30th, yeah, okay, so that's quite a way away, and I'm sure we'll talk about that between now and then anyway. All right, so here's our first question about this, really. So, what is municipal planning? Is it vital? Is it vital for our local communities? It implies that cities plan for every future development, but I think the truth of the matter is it seems that few do. Seems.
Mm-hmm. Well, or else you wouldn't be having things like Thundering Waters development and people planning to build houses over it and other types of things where it's just senseless urban sprawl.
Yeah, and you've got things like let's go to St. Catharines and that 30 floor condo unit that was supposed to be where they knocked down Gord's Place, the building at Gord's Place on James Street, to build a 30 floor condo with no parking. Now,
yeah, with no parking, isn't that interesting? Yeah. They're all going to come from all over the world to buy a condo there.
Yeah. Because
we all know it's this investment property. They're just going to wait till the price goes up and then use that.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, there's still not been a shovel in the ground on that one, has there?
Nope, I haven't seen any shovels.
And another one we probably should also talk about is Niagara 77. That's a year plus now. It almost seems like there's no shovel in the ground there.
Is that ever going to get built?
Yeah. And again, that's one of these that has under the number of, it has 77 floors. It's got 300 to 400 units on it, and there's going to be 80 parking spaces.
Interesting. Wasn't that the one that hospitality workers are going to be able to live in and walk to work?
Yeah, it's going to be the one that hospitality workers can live in and walk to work. But they forgot one key detail. Hospitality workers can't afford to live there.
Yep. Exactly. This is where if you had somebody who actually made sense and knew about what to do with these things, you would actually have better planning. You would have people be able to live closer to the work, be able to park where they need to park, rather than this. It just seems pretty
I've got
weird.
no objection. I've got no objection. When I was younger, I used to walk long distances to work. There we go, Robert DePaul,
Hey,
giving
Robert.
us
Good morning,
morning from Facebook. There we go. No, from YouTube. There we go,
he's
Robert.
from YouTube.
Welcome, our first YouTube. Actually, first YouTube viewer, regular YouTube viewer now, because he's watched more than once.
Yes, he's been on a few times when I was on. Yes.
Yeah. So there we go. And there's a number of these developments, and we can argue the question of traffic, and in fact, traffic's later on the agenda anyway. We can argue the question of traffic, whether they should be planning buses more, planning walkable cities. All of those kind of arguments are things that anybody could put up. But if we don't have basic transit as is right now, how are we going to get to work is an important question. And not many people work close enough that they can walk there.
Yeah, exactly.
You could possibly, if you were a dozen years younger, you could possibly walk to work, because it's probably about 2.5 to 3 miles from where you are to where you work, right? And I used to do that distance before I'd catch the tube train home, because I'd give myself 2 or 3 miles walk across beautiful parts of London in order that I can get a later tube train that wouldn't be as packed. But that was a personal choice thing. Would I walk 2 or 3 miles to work? Probably not.
Well, both you and I walked 12 miles back and forth to school, all the way in 12 feet of snow. Okay, so we're used to that sort of thing.
Well, you did from Northern Ontario.
Oh, yes.
I saw snow a grand total of one time during my school hours, and we weren't allowed out for morning break because it was snowing.
Oh my God!
By lunchtime there was no snow. By lunchtime there was no snow, so we were done. We could have a look at the snow out the classroom windows. Wow, it was snowing in southern England. Miracle of miracles. And that was it. I think that's the same day that buses slid on Commercial Hill as they were trying to get up the hill from the train station.
Oh,
All right. Okay. So, and again, that's an aspect. Well, actually, traffic and how you move traffic is also an aspect of city planning as well, right? When we think about city planning, we often think about those buildings we're throwing up, right?
Yep.
And I do genuinely raise the question of, they're putting up in St. Catharines right now, they're putting up a 15-floor apartment building, and around the corner from it, the plan is to put up a 30-floor apartment building. I'd have to say that realistically, there's not in a small city like St. Catharines, in a small city like Niagara Falls, and in most of the Niagara region, there's very little reason to be putting up anything above 10 floors. We want higher density.
This is one of the unless they're anticipating that thousands of people would be flocking to the community because they just all want to live in Niagara region all of a sudden.
Well, there's always a natural tendency. There's an ebb and flow of people everywhere, right? And remember, 95% of people, well, back in the 80s, 95% of people die within 50 miles of where they were born, right? Probably today that figures probably in the 80th percentile, but still the vast majority of people die within 50 miles of where they were born.
Yeah, right? I was born way up north, so
well,
unless I go back up north, that isn't going to happen.
Well, and hey, I'm already 4,000 miles away from where I was born.
Oh yes, exactly. It's a long swim.
Unless I happen to die on a visit to London, you know, that isn't going to be true.
Yep. Unless, well, it's a long swim away, though, Peter.
that it is. Okay, so here's the question about, you know, how do we plan cities? So, Laurie Lococo yesterday talked about the city of Niagara Falls updating their official plan because of recent changes in the economy. And I thought that was interesting. And that is a good thing that they're taking a look at that because, all the expenses have gone up, whether we like it or not, city budgets. And the reason we're all paying more on our property taxes right now is largely due to the fact it's not, you know, it's easy to make accusations of city overspending, but in fact here, when you think about it, if let's say that in 2020 you budgeted that you were going to update your living room and you went through everything that was at Home Depot or Lowe's or Rona, etc., and you budgeted what was going to be your spend for your for redoing your living room all nice and fancy, and let's say that budget, the spend was going to be $10,000, right? Go grand, or go home, right? So your budget was $10,000, and now you went back to Home Depot last year to confirm everything, and suddenly now your budget, what you would spend on the same products that you would have bought in 2020 is now, you know, is now $15,000 or more, right?
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is that, you know, cities have been caught up in that as much as anything else because they've got to do roadworks, so they've got to buy tarmac, and the tarmac costs more.
Yeah. And the labor too, the price of labor.
Yep. And they've had to renegotiate labor contracts. Tarmac's gone up, you know, fence materials have gone up.
Everything like that just goes up. Even if you just have the same thing you always had, paying for the same thing, you're still going to get an increase.
Yeah. Okay. Karen Fraser's saying good morning. It looks like Mike Cushman isn't here this morning. Okay, but anyway, I know Mike will listen later on. Morning, Karen.
I'm sure he'll drop in.
Yeah, morning, Karen.
Hello.
Enjoy yourself this morning. Okay. Now, Laurie Lococo, as I said, Laurie Lococo was talking about updating that official plan, and that's a good thing in a way because that was set probably 5 or 6 years ago now when they were talking about the plan for the next 20 years. And some of that will have changed because, well, just out of necessity. Some of it will have changed because things changed around them, right?
Yeah.
So I guess that, you know, there is a, you know, what she's, by saying that, she's kind of negating our thing about, you know, there not really being municipal planning. Right. But I say this insofar as the vast majority of cities in the world are not planned, but are actually grow organically. Right? It's not like you set an area, you say, here's the city centre, and we're going to have this section in the northeast being where all the industry is, and the rest of and the areas around the city centre is where we're going to put all the leisure, and the other areas are where we're going to put all the housing. So, and the reason we have the industry in the northeast is because the winds go from the southwest to the northeast, so it will blow the smoke away from the city. That would be nice kind of thinking and planning. That's a very simplistic plan I put there, right? But that doesn't happen.
Yeah, well, in the 90s, they deliberately created a city, Seaton in Ontario. I have no idea where that city is, but it's probably somewhere near Toronto or in the GTA.
Yeah. I've never heard of that.
They deliberately built it, which was something that's unusual. And they tried to set it so that people in that community had different amenities that people would think like your typical dream city. But it's something that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It's like people want to move to Niagara Falls, and then they just find a house there, buy it, and then they move in.
Yeah, I was going to say there is one example that I'm very much aware of. In England in the 1950s, they named a city Milton Keynes, and it was after Milton, who was an economist, and Keynes, who was an economist, right?
So opposite ends of the spectrum.
Exactly the opposite ends of the spectrum, but they built a planned city called Milton Keynes. And what they did in building that city was they built a city centre which had like city offices, leisure amenities, football grounds, shopping centres, all in the city centre with more than adequate parking, right? So they planned parking in right from the outset. Right. And actually they did a very good job of parking, because their parking in the 2000s, the more than adequate parking in the 2000s, most of their lanes were created as dual carriageway lanes. And if you think about it, back in the 50s, probably the need for dual carriageway was none, and people were looking at this and going, that's mighty strange. But they built all these dual carriageways around the city in order to take traffic around the city, whether it's by bus, and they have a good bus service up there as well. All right, so they have a good and effective bus service to take people around. It doesn't go into the neighbor; it goes down the main streets that touch all of the neighborhoods in question. It doesn't go into the neighborhoods; it goes along the edges of the neighborhoods. And they have walkways, they have cycle lanes, they have everything in Milton Keynes that is planned, right? So the city, the businesses, they were all, how and where and what types of buildings, generally speaking, were planned in the 1950s and 60s.
Yeah, because that's sometimes what people do. They'll do that, and then people will gradually move into that community.
Yeah.
And then build that community. But as that community is built, the developers apparently start setting the clause in.
Yeah. Well, then the other thing is that every year, that's something that Laurie was talking about. They make 5-year plans. We talked about the 20-year official plan, and they sometimes make longer forecasts. A few years ago, they were talking about the vision for 2050. All right. And that's all very well. But again, a vision for 2050 that you make today is altered by something that you approve tomorrow, isn't it?
Exactly. And you don't know what the future actually might hold.
Yeah.
Okay. There might be other needs or greater needs. Like, for example, if we're planning on greater participation of greater population here in the area, and what happens if for some reason the population doesn't grow as much as we predicted?
Or grows twice as much as we predicted.
Or there's a whole bunch of people who moves in. Like, especially if younger people move in, then there's going to be a lot more population growth than if it's older people retiring. Yeah.
Randy West makes an interesting point. The official plan is far more intended to stipulate limitations to development and use than it would be for intended growth, as can be seen by the most recent changes to the zoning in Niagara South and the purchase of the airport on Sodom. It's true. There's an element of that, so those sort of things do come into play. Absolutely correct, Randy. Right. But then again, we still have that. We still have a lot of questions about that whole question about development. Essentially, let's say that you had my ideal city plan and you were saying, okay, we're going to put industry in the northeast of the city because then the winds can blow away the chemicals, the fumes, and everything like that, right?
They won't be in anybody's backyard.
Yeah, I'm not in anybody's backyard, and you've got that idealistic view, and basically you've been building around the central hub. You've been building housing, excluding that northeastern zone because you're basically saying, well, I'm reserving that for industry, and then an industrial area buys up, irrespective of your plan. An industrial area buys up a section in the southwest of the city and says, nope, it's got the right water here. We got a nice river we can suck into our factory, in order to cool. Yeah, and we're going to employ 25,000 people on a 3-shift system. See how quickly the city changes that plan.
Oh yes,
right.
More tax dollars. More people.
Yeah. Well, and employment and good, healthy employment for the city, right?
Yeah.
So how do you really do that? And that's so often. And Randy says exactly, how quickly do you change that? Exactly. At the end of the day, my kind of moral, the kind of ideal plan just kind of evaporates because, hey, these people are bringing millions of dollars to the city.
Yeah.
And
they're building all this infrastructure and other types of things so they can support their industry. Hey, this is
to say, it's going to be about. You don't have to worry about the fumes because it's going to be 5 miles out from the city. But we're going to build this great highway where you can get the buses to and from. It's going to be the factory highway, and we'll pay for all of that. We're going to get the buses and cars and everybody to and from the thing. Oh, and by the way, we're going to put $10 million into your bus infrastructure. Oh, we're going to buy 2 buses, right?
2 whole buses.
And so if you were to put that together, essentially the city plan just is now out the window, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And frequently happens.
Yeah, and by the way, we're now the official sponsors of your local soccer team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who are now elevating their way up to the top leagues, and that's going to bring additional people into the city. Except so those kind of things where they, I wouldn't say bribe their way into it, but you know what I mean. I'm not saying there's any untoward doing there, but it's the whole plan changes like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, because if they're perceived as being helpful to the city, then as things are not turning out as planned with this particular industry, for example, it can still pollute everybody in that particular neighborhood and surrounding areas, then soon the city has pickets at its door from people who live around the area.
Well, actually, pollution is another question entirely. If we were to take a look at places like Cyanamid, places like GM in St. Catharines, we know them now as polluted lands. But here's the question: did the people who were putting those factories in place I actually Cyanamid's 100 years ago. It's about 1918, I think they built Cyanamid.
Oh, yeah.
And Mike would probably tell me, no, you're wrong. And I think it's in the 40s that they put 30s or 40s that they put the GM plant together in St. Catharines. And basically so those sort of things, it's not about whether those manufacturers ever intended to pollute the land. Let's take it on face value that they did not, right? Let's take it
Well,
on
nobody was talking about pollution.
Yeah. Well, the polluting the land is a thing that happened, let's say, largely because people didn't know about about the dire effects of what they were producing.
Then it goes in the 70s and 80s, and you get this little thing called environmental law in class action suits.
Yeah. And the point being is that you can't blame people because they were manufacturing stuff that they didn't know was harmful to the environment, right? But when they are manufacturing stuff where they know it's harmful to the environment, then there's a blame issue coming down the line there.
Yeah.
Right.
Like that's what they were talking about in some of the lawsuits in the US. Some of the factories knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And they knew people were pouring chemicals into areas where it could end up in the water supply and different things like that.
That's the typical Erin Brockovich. That's the basis of what happened in Erin Brockovich, isn't it?
Yeah. That's based on a true story, actually.
I know. And you actually met Erin, didn't you, one time?
Yes, I did. Good.
What was
very
so what was she speaking about? Was she speaking, or was it?
She just talked about a little bit about her life, and she now does a lot of things like environmental, like she does a lot of work for different things like across the America about she'll go travel to different places, help people to plan class action suits where there is some kind of cause for them, like there could be another factory spilling their PCBs into drinking water and so forth. So she'll travel there and she'll help do the studies with people and help people get together and to pay for these class action suits.
Basically, she was a law clerk in the firm in the original action that she took on. I don't remember the name of the city. And she organized that lawsuit and basically got members into the class action.
Yeah, there's 760 or something people in that area. It's in California somewhere.
Yeah, that I did know. I just don't remember the name of the town of the city.
I can't remember the city name, but she was there, and then she came back and she begged her boss to take on the case because she was noticing, going through the files, going into the city registry, photocopying all the stuff that she saw for the city registry and putting them together, and like this woman knew how to do her research.
Yeah.
Kind of reminded me of Lois Gibbs. I've also met Lois Gibbs with the Love Canal fight, and that's closer to home here.
Okay.
On the New York side of Niagara.
Yeah. Well, that actually was an important factor as well. Okay.
Yeah.
So a couple of interesting stories there. Okay, so let's look at what Randy is saying. Municipalities try to rework and rebuild areas if used properties such as downtowns, but Walmart decides that downtown is simply not worth the investment, even though the city invested millions in infrastructure repairs. Well, actually, that actually brings up a good point, because I see, I think about Walmart, and I'm not a big user of Walmart, and I wouldn't be even if there was one 100 meters from me. I probably wouldn't use it every day. But it does occur to me that that Walmart that we have that's on Oakdale is actually, it is probably a 10-minute drive on a good day, 15 minutes on a bad day, in across Niagara Falls. And I'm like, do I really want to go to Walmart, even if I felt like going to Walmart? And I wonder actually, for example, in St. Catharines, you've got more than one Walmart. You've got one at 4th Avenue. You've got one up the northern end of Welland Avenue.
Yeah, we've got a few of them.
Yeah.
Penn Center.
And you've got one at the Penn Center. Yeah. So you've got
and
three.
Welland. Yeah, in Welland. And
yeah,
Welland
you've got three. One at the Penn Center, one on 4th Avenue, and one on Welland Avenue, on the northern end of Welland Avenue. So you've got three in a city of 140,000. We've got one. Okay, so admittedly, it's a bigger one than any of the ones that you've got in St. Catharines. We got one for a city of 90,000.
Yeah. Well, we got a Walmart Supercenter. But the one on 4th Avenue is the Supercenter. We have grocery store, everything.
Oh, I've never been in the 4th Avenue one, I have to admit. Yeah.
And you can buy beer there.
Okay. Okay. So that is a bigger one. Okay. We have one Supercenter, but I actually would say that, hey, even, I'm not a big fan of box stores, but if you were to put one at the corner of Stanley and Thoroldstone Road in the plot of land just there, a Walmart right there, it would do super business in the northeast in the north of the city. Right. And as I say, I'm not a big fan of them, but sometimes you have to think about that, because why, because if the only place I can get the doodad that I'm looking for is Walmart, then I have to plan a visit to Walmart.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But these days there's a lot of competition, for most things.
True.
You can get it. Yeah. Although I found something at Walmart I couldn't find anywhere else.
Well, that's one of the big problems. There's a couple of things you can find. Yeah. There's a couple of things.
Litter for my cats.
Well, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a couple of things you can find at Walmart that you can't find anywhere else, and that's always an interesting question, So now, one of the questions we've talked about here is, of course, we touched on very briefly, but this has to come into city plans no matter what the length of your plan. You've got the Cyanamid property in Niagara Falls. You've got the former GM property in St. Catharines. You've got steelworks, etc., in Welland that are all declared as poisonous land. And the official declaration about, for instance, cyanamid is that it shouldn't be used at least for another 50 to 100 years. The question here is that, and that was made back in the 80s or 90s, I forget which, but Karen would certainly know that. And the question here is, so those plots, potentially, hundreds of, just put it in, they're hundreds of acres of rotting land, if you know what I mean. Land that can't be used because there's potential fatalities by using them. So what do we do with those gaping great holes in our landscape?
That's a really, really tough question. Like, to clean it up, somebody's going to have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Okay. And generally, we believe that it should be the owner of that property, or the original owners should take some responsibility. But how do we make them do it?
Well, and the question here is, that's an actually interesting question. And if Mike were here today, there would already be a massive piece on how we do that, right?
Oh, yes.
Right. The question, because he's Mr. Environmental, he knows and understands. He's looked at industrial waste and the issues about industrial wasteland, and he has a book that actually discusses the whole question about Love Canal. and as well as the cyanamide plant here in Niagara Falls, and ironically, former industrial sites in the US, in places like Germany, in places like Russia as well, right? So that blight is a worldwide blight about what you do with those poisoned areas. And you could make the argument, and you could make the argument that clean it up, do the best you can to clean it up, and put new industry on there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, to try to use it for something else like housing is so disingenuous.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If you took the argument that, hey, we won't use it for housing, but we will put new industry on there. We'll clean it up and we'll put new industry on there. Now, there's some arguments about, okay, I can get that because people are at work only 8 hours a day and only 5 days a week. So even if you were running a factory with three shifts running 24/7, you still wouldn't have anybody who's there for longer than 8 hours a day and longer than 5 days in a week, right? So you, generally speaking, people would be in and out of the poisoned area, if you like, and wouldn't suffer because of it, so long as you didn't add new poison to that area. Let's say that you had an environmentally responsible company coming in and saying that they would, they would deal with, make sure that there is no waste that is going to poison the environment.
Yeah, like a recycling plant maybe, or something. Somebody that runs on green.
Okay, so Randy makes a point. The problem with people like Mike Cookman is that these properties are never cleaned up enough. You can make that argument as well. I've talked about that with Mike. So how would you practically clean the cyanamide land? Basically, you can take all the soil away, and there are brownfield environmental agency or companies that will actually reprocess that, and they can actually turn certain parts of that soil, use it for industrial purposes, so they can make gases off of it. They can clean the soil up at the end of the day. So they could take away your soil, they could bring back new virgin clean soil. But according to what Mike was saying, even if you took all the soil and what was left now was simply the rock, the limestone. He's saying that down in the limestone there, you've got even more poison.
Yep.
Right. And a rainy day, what the problem that Mike makes this point, that the issue with that is that on a rainy day, that poison comes up out of the limestone.
Yep. There's been a lot of research, like in the area where the old GM plant on Ontario Street, there's a cancer cluster around there.
Yep.
And some news articles were written about that, with people living in that area have developed very strange forms of cancer, more than the usual that you would expect.
Yeah. And actually, so that really goes back to the question about planning, about planning that sort of thing, because in the future, we don't just, it's not just about, we're going to build that proverbial, the way I put it, we're going to build the industrial area in the northeast of the city and everything will be fine because the pollution will get washed away. In the future, we're not really even allowed to actually allow it to pollute.
Can't.
Right. And that's an important aspect, because we have to now take that into consideration.
Like there has to be environmental assessment and so forth before putting something up.
Yeah. And and actually that's a very important question. And hey, when you talk about environmental assessment and you're looking at places like Thundering Waters, just to use that particular example,
And who did the environmental assessment there? The
yeah,
Thundering Waters.
yeah, and here you're talking about wetlands that culturally, well, actually, wetlands with unique species on them,
Yep.
and you should be, that should lead you to ask questions. And why do we, I've always had this question. I remember back in, oh God, when was it? Some time ago. I was actually I was staying in Glasgow for about a year. I was doing a contract up there in Glasgow, a management consultancy contract up in Glasgow, and one of the thoughts that I had, the the place I was working at, the office building was like on the top of a hill, looking down towards the River Clyde. And what was going up along the River Clyde was new condominium buildings right on the edge of the Clyde. So these are where the condominium buildings, literally where the shipyards used to be, where Glasgow shipyards used to be. And there's just condo buildings and condo buildings. And basically Glasgow is built on a couple of hills that come down into the Clyde, into the valley of the Clyde River. The sharpness of the hills, and everything. And of course, Glasgow, being a former industrial city, has gone to a point whereby in the 2000s, 2010s, etc., it is cleaning up. It's becoming a much cleaner city to live in, much more pretty city to live in. And a lot of people that were, particularly those that were living on the hill, we're looking forward to that ability to see the Clyde River. Now there's no smog in the city, right? Now the smog is gone. We can see the Clyde River until a developer puts a condo building up at the Clyde River, on the edge of the Clyde River. That nobody local can afford, by the way.
And isn't there something about where developers place buildings that they don't think about these things, like in Welland? Wasn't there a company that built something that collapsed, Never Trust or something?
Yeah, well, that's another question entirely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they should be doing studies and research before they build these things.
Yeah. Okay. So Randy West, and I won't put this one up because it's too big. Randy West states Mike Cushman has a wealth of information experience, second to none. Absolutely agree. For our area, based on his practical experiences, many of which he and I, Randy West, both share. He shares that same stuff with me. He shares it with a lot of people around the city because he's passionate about it. How do you take a town that has lost all of its active manufacturing, with the ownerships long moved on, and try to clean the environmental history of each of those commercial properties? That's a big problem, especially since cyanamide no longer exists. Right? And
especially if you were an industrial town,
yeah,
and you had a lot of different industries,
yeah,
and then all the industries had to leave or they closed down due to economic changes, that sort of thing. What do you do? Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah. And okay, so I'm going to actually leave the development at that side and put the development aside, because there's another crucial question that I think we must at least dive into a little bit here on before the end of the show. Okay, so Mike Cushman raised a question that was in the comments for yesterday's show, which I never asked Laurie because we didn't have the time. And he raised a question about one of the questions is that we don't get traffic planning in a lot of what's going on. So we get told at City Hall, oh, it conforms to the existing traffic plan. 77 floors, it conforms to the existing traffic plan. I think not. Right?
I don't think so. Like you
Yeah.
just triple, quadrupled the
Yeah.
potential traffic around that area.
Yeah. And Adam Hyde also talked about traffic last week. And Adam basically lives up. He has a business that's in one end, what is in the old downtown area at basically at the area which you would call Drummond and McLeod, that area. And he has he lives up along McLeod, across the QEW in the Kayla and McLeod area. And he was telling us about how many traffic lights there are between him and his workplace. And once he turns off on Drummond Road, it's plain sailing, easy to work. All right. So obviously his business, he's not likely to move that unless he's, got particular growth or something like that. Unless there's any change in his business plan, he's not likely to move it. Right. He likes where he is. He gets on well with the landlord overall, in the same way as we get on with our landlord at work, right?
Well, we try.
We try, yes, we try. I think that's about the size of it. And that's probably the best you can say with any commercial lease, right? So basically, Adam was saying one of the challenges he faces is that he comes out of his house, he makes a left-hand turn onto McLeod Road, and then it depends. One day there's no chart. It's going to take him 40 minutes to get those 7 traffic lights, and another day it's like 5. And part of the problem lies is that with the new developments on McLeod Road, and many of these new developments on McLeod being higher density developments, where some of the apartment buildings that are going up are 6, 7, 8 stories in height or even higher. And there inevitably is going to be more traffic down that section. One of the questions we talked about was the fact that if you did city planning properly, you would make sure that, for example, the traffic lights all changed at the similar pace. For example, if you were to go along McLeod Road from where Adam lives out through to where he gets off McLeod Road, if you were to go at 50 kilometers an hour and you were on a green light section, you'd go green, 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 green. And if so long as you stayed at the 50 kilometer an hour mark, you respect the speed limit, you get the turn to green as you go through the traffic light. And if you go to a stoplight, it's like the first time, because it's the first time you join the road, because next time everything's on green as you go through, because you've caught up with the tail end of the next block of traffic, right? And the point being is that turning to green is something doesn't even need AI in traffic lights. It just basically needs computer control in traffic lights. And the rules are simple. You travel at 50 kilometers an hour, you're going to pass through the green light, going town bound in the morning and going out of town in the evening. And you can make those rules, and the traffic densities will support those rules, right? The question that Mike Cushman raised, and it's very important, is that there was a new development that was put up, and I remember precisely that they said it conforms to the current traffic plan. Fine. 3 months later, there's a new building planned, I think 400 meters from the first building. Similar type of size. And what was the statement about the traffic plan? it conforms to the pre-existing traffic plan for this area. No, you're just putting up 2 new buildings, right? And you've done no traffic replanning. I'm sorry, that is out of order. I'm sorry,
Because
absolutely.
people be going in and out to go to work.
Yeah.
People getting visitors, different things. Like, come on, be real.
Yeah, be real. Absolutely. And there are going to be some examples whereby what you're going to do is you've got a, so essentially what you're going to end up doing is, so your 30-floor complex here by and of itself is going to have a traffic light in maybe not the day it's built, but within 10 years is going to have a traffic light right outside the major exit of that complex, because it's going to be impossible for people to turn left out of that complex because of the traffic going to the right, constant traffic going to the right. So they'll be putting in a traffic light at that block, right? And then 400 meters away, 500 meters away, they'll be putting in another traffic light at that building when it gets, 10 years after that one gets built. Because again, those people can't get out, can't make the left turn into the major traffic road. So essentially now you put in 2 new traffic lights, and possibly you've got a situation where you've got a traffic light, 150 meters of traffic light, 200 meters of traffic light, 300 meters of traffic light. And if those
what if you get a whole series of reds?
Well, and if those are not in sync, you're in serious trouble.
And all you go out, you're going down that street and you get a whole series of reds. Did that happen to you one time?
Yeah, I actually did. Every traffic light, no, thankfully, every traffic light I had to get into work quickly. Every traffic light I hit between here and work was red. Right? Anyway. So, Mike, Randy West basically says school busing has a far greater effect on traffic than light timing, and school busing occurs 4 times a day. Well, that does have a big effect.
Because everybody can't go past it. They got to stop.
Yeah, that does have a big effect. That's for sure. And actually, that's an interesting one, because on a 4-lane highway where you've got 2 lanes going in one direction and 2 lanes in the other direction, if that highway does not have a central reservation, a central hard reservation, people on the right-hand lane that have got nothing to do with where the bus is on the far left have to stop. Right. Whereas if there's a central reservation, there's nobody walking across, you don't have to stop.
Yep. So this is there's a point there.
There is a point there. There is definitely a point there. Okay, you need to compare all of McLeod Road from Marineland to Kayla with a single intersection at Dorchester and Thoroldstone. Why does one stop dead and yet McLeod flows reasonably? Yeah, very good question. And it's all about the flow of the traffic lights, and it's not about it's probably about humans saying the priorities here should be. No, you got no right to think about priorities. Put it down to a computer program. The computer program can figure out what you're doing. In fact, I was saying to Adam, and I believe I said to you before, Angela, one of the things you could do is I come out my driveway, I go past a traffic light. If there's a monitor on the traffic light, it's going to start to actually detect that there's motion in that area, right? And the motion, then the monitor try to go past the next, I said traffic light, I meant lamppost. I go past the next lamppost, and it's going to now start to say, okay, he's not just going to go around the corner, he's going somewhere, right? And it can start to predict ahead of me as to what my likelihood is of getting to the next junction. if I turn right, it gets a different computation than if I go left, but the computation is still valid. So then you're going along, and if you get closer in onto the next traffic light, then the situation should be, okay, if traffic permits, I can change this traffic light from red to green when Peter gets to that junction. So when I'm within 50 meters of the junction, the traffic light turns from red to green. So I can then move into that lane. So I can now move I can go left, right, straight on, whatever the traffic light permits. And now that whole process starts all over again in relation to the next traffic light further down the line. And essentially, it's not about artificial intelligence. It's about just computational things. There's a probability that when you start at a point and you're going along a road in a particular direction, if you're a mile away from the next set of traffic lights, the probability might only be 20% you're going to arrive there, right? Because you could be pulling into a driveway 300 meters down the road. You could be turning onto the next left-hand turn on that road that's not traffic lighted, etc. But the fact is that by monitoring the vehicles, and I'm not talking about monitoring as in what your number plate is, the system doesn't need to know that kind of rubbish. But it looks at it and says, looks at probability that you're going to be at the next set of traffic lights. And it could start also some probability based upon your positioning in the road as to whether you're on the left lane or on the right lane, as to whether you're going to turn left or right or go straight on at the next junction. So each of those can be measured based upon your position in the road. And as you go along, it increases the probability that you're going to get to the next set of traffic lights. And, and even if you pull into the last driveway just before the traffic lights, the chances are that you're going to trigger that traffic light anyway. And the point being is that you can predict, there's a certain amount of predictability based upon your driving pattern, and that could actually be utilized to actually trigger most lights.
Well, now they have, sometimes they do look at the number plates if you're looking at the red light cameras that are coming in.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about number plates quite deliberately. Yeah, you could make that argument that you could do number plates if you've got infractions. But on the whole, I was not saying number plate. I'm saying we're not interested in number plates, because I don't need to know that your car, Angela, ABC 1234. I'm not following you around. I'm not predicting where Angela's going or monitoring where Angela's going. I'm not interested in the fact that Angela's number plate ABCD 1234 is heading west on a particular road at a particular time. That doesn't.
Well, that's more on statistical probabilities.
Yeah, because my program is not interested in your number plate at all, because it's basically just weighted by the fact that I'm looking at the whole thing. Now, there is a possibility that your number plate ABCD 1234 on Monday to Friday means that you're going to go to the end of the road, you're going to turn left, you're going to turn left again, you're going to go past the lights, you're going to go past the 4 types of lights, then you're going to turn right, then you go past 4 types of lights, and then you're going to turn left into the car park. But on a Saturday, you go to the end of the road, you turn right, you go past 3 sets of lights, you turn left onto the main road, go past 4 sets of lights and into the shopping mall. You could argue maybe there is a pattern there. There's a pattern there. We should really be predicting that, because because what's to say that Angela coming out of her driveway, turning left, doing that particular pattern, she may go on to, instead of going into the left-hand drive, she may go straight on and onto the highway, because today she's going different. If you start making patterns, if you break the predictability, the random predictability pattern, you break the system, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That might have been what happened when you had a whole set of red lights facing you.
Yeah, and essentially, exactly, my program is actually just simply looking at motion on the streets, right?
Yeah.
That is all, right? I'm not, and the reason why I say you have on every lamppost motion sensors that are tuned to motion, detect motions of cars and trucks and buses and things like that. You might well want to, for example, if your system is supposed to prioritize buses, and you detect that a bus is going past your sensor, you might well turn the lights because there's a bus coming.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, that's what they do with this bus only lanes. They have these bus specific lanes, which they
We wouldn't necessarily
use
to have bus only lanes with that type system. You could basically say, okay, along this particular road there's a bus coming. It's a 92 bus. The 92 bus always turns left at the traffic light. So therefore, I'm making sure that that bus gets through the traffic light effectively.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
You would no longer necessarily need bus lanes because you could have more effectively controlled the traffic lights around the bus.
But that's interesting, though, what you're talking about. It's almost like that. It's almost pre-programmed, and they can detect it just through motion.
Well, it's not it's not. It's programmed in the sense that it's looking for motion. If the number 92 bus is 15 minutes late, you say why it shouldn't be programmed around, oh, the 92 bus schedule is this particular time. If the 92 bus is 15 minutes late because of an accident that occurred on its route, it's still going to detect that it still sends the pulse that says, hi, I'm the 92 bus, right?
Yep.
And
then it treats the bus the same way.
And it treats the bus. It treats the bus as the 92 bus every time the 92 bus comes by, whether it's on time or not. Right.
Yeah.
And the point being is the 92 bus gets a certain priority that's programmed into the system. And okay, so then the question about Mandy makes a good point about pedestrian crossing. And again, you can also use same motion sensors for pedestrian crossings, but remember, pedestrians also move at a slower pace.
Yeah, and sometimes pedestrians jaywalk.
That is true. Yeah, that is true. Because in fact, actually,
not referring to any specific person.
Well, in fact, actually, what you're talking about is they make the right-hand turn. And therefore that you're predicting that they will go up to the next crossing, which is 150 meters away from that right-hand turn, and you might predict that would be the case, but in fact they amble across at 50 meters across instead of going 150 meters to the crossing. Yeah, exactly. But again, that can all still be taken care of. It's people do unpredictable things. Yep. And even cars do unpredictable things, even car drivers will do unpredictable things.
Some of the interesting things when they planned our city downtown, like they used to have a lot of one-way streets. And people were starting to complain about it because they felt that this was slowing things down. It caused a lot of issues for businesses and so forth. So they turned the streets into two-way streets. And there was a lot of work done on that.
Yeah.
It took them a while to actually reconstruct it in a two-way street. And then they put specific crossings where all a pedestrian had to do is just raise their hand and cross, right? Because then the cars would slow down because this was built into the system so that pedestrians could just cross at that time. And if there's no pedestrians, cars should just go on as they normally do.
Yeah. Well, and that's an important aspect. Well, you're talking about a lot of cities. St. Catharines is unusual about having a one-way system within the heart of St. Catharines, because in fact St. Catharines is such a small city, right? With the city I used to be in, which was more than twice the size of St. Catharines, the city I grew up in Southampton on the south coast. we had a one-way system down the area that I was at, because it essentially operated as a dual carriageway. So the left-hand side, the left-hand road took all the traffic that was coming in from the west to the city centre, and was 2 lanes of traffic heading into the city. The road 50 meters from it coming would be the other way, would be the westbound lane heading out of town, because remember, hey, it operates on the British system where you drive on the left-hand side of the road, right? And that would therefore be 2 lanes of traffic going out of town. And that was the logic of their one-way system. The one-way system, basically, they stopped the one-way system as soon as they built a bypass for that area. Right?
Yeah.
And
this is interesting how they do that. They plan it for bikes, they plan it for cars, trucks, for buses, and it's very interesting how they control it so that they can work together.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, in fact, actually, I was when I was talking about traffic lights, of course, the primary user of traffic lights, or the primary person who's snarled up with traffic lights, is often the car. Bicycles tend to get through, to have other ways to get through traffic lights. But there's absolutely bicycles, pedestrians, all of those actually are valid traffic light users. And, there could be some prioritization that attaches to each of those.
Yeah, because especially if you got those things with the flashing green on the right hand or whatever, like that would help. Let's say if you have a bicycle and they're going forward, and then that will tell the car not to turn, right, at that time when the bicycle is turning.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right? Because that's when a lot of accidents occur.
Yeah, and we could be a lot smarter with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Randy makes a point. Downtown St. Catharines was planned for the personal training horse buggy.
Yeah. It's still remembering the horse and buggy days for sure.
Right. And have you ever tried to parallel park a horse and buggy? No.
They don't have those computer controls so much.
No. Yeah. I love the image, Randy. I absolutely love the image. And I think we're going to have to leave it at that point, kind of end the thing. And so kind of, what do you think, Angela? We're just have to say goodbye on that thought, I think, So thank you, Angela, for being with us. And
oh God, this is an interesting discussion.
Yeah, it is an interesting discussion. I think all the ones we've had are interesting discussions.
Yeah,
and I've loved each of them. So thank you. And Dave Wheeler chimes in, no traffic to speak of in Monteverde, Verde, Costa Rica. So goodbye, right? Okay. So let's say goodbye on that one. Thank you, everybody.
So you got his little report to us. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good to hear from you, Dave.
Thank you, everybody.